Hi, Mike here. Now I'm a creationist. I believe that God created this world and all the beauty in it and all the creatures. And I've been researching evolution for many, many years, and I can't see any real concrete evidence for evolution. It's all just storytelling and make-believe. So this video is a remake of a geology video I did about the proof of a Genesis flood, or is it proof of millions of years? So more logically, it's the biblical global flood, empirical evidence observed in the fine horizontal sedimentary layers, such as the Grand Canyon or many places around the world. Now the reason why I'm remaking it is because I got a lot of critique for my first video, so I did a rebuttal to the person that did a lot of critiquing. He was a geologist, but I wasn't happy with it. I was quite sarcastic. So this is a remake now. So you can see all those lines in the Grand Canyon there that are absolutely straight. So did this form over millions of years? Well, not as far as I'm concerned. So what does all the horizontal sedimentary rock found in the world in many, many places tell us about Earth's history? Millions of years of geological time, or a catastrophic great biblical flood only thousands of years ago? You can see straight lines there, can't you, of horizontal sedimentary layers. Why horizontal layers, flat as pancakes worldwide? Well, you look at the Grand Canyon there and you can see the straight lines. If there'd have been millions of years, there would have been all up and down, showing erosion and bioturbation. But no, we see lots and lots of this. Not everywhere, because there are places where there's been volcanoes and there's been some uplift, but we do see horizontal layers. So for instance there, let's just zoom in on this. You can see the straight layers there, so that we'll zoom in on that. Still straight, no sign of erosion. Zoom in again, still straight, no sign of erosion, just absolutely straight horizontal waterborne sedimentary layers with no erosion, no bioturbation. Now the great unconformity, that's it down there, yeah, is a major puzzle for evolutionary geologists. But it's not for Bible believing creationists, because they know that there was a global flood, and the unconformity at the bottom there, you can see that it's got diagonal lines of rock. Well, there was a lot more rock above that when the global flood started, and it was all eroded away with the mighty force of the waters. Then it was relayed down in these very horizontal ways, and that's what we see today. And in the great uniformity, there's no fossils. In the Precambrian, there's no fossils, but we start getting fossils in these layers above. And I'll talk about some fossils in the red wall limestone nautiloid fossils a bit later on. So this is, the millions of years of geology that a lot of people talk about. So the Canyonlands National Park is a showcase of geology in each of the park's districts. Visitors can see the remarkable effects of millions of years of erosion on a landscape of sedimentary rock. Most of the rock is found in the Canyonland today came from distant mountain ranges, like the ancestral Rockies or even the Appalachians. For millions of years, rock was broken down and carried here by wind and water, creating deposits that eventually became distinct layers of sedimentary rock. Some layers were laid down by rivers Their sandy channels surrounding by swamps and lakes. Wind brought some of the thickest layers, creating vast sand deserts or dune fields on the shores of an ancient sea. And then they say there was uplift. So many of the rocks exposed in the canyons were deposited near sea level. Today the average elevation is over 5,000 feet above sea level, a significant uplift. Now what they're saying is all these layers were formed by all these different processes. It does not make sense. If it was formed by all these processes, you would have lots of up and down, higgledy-piggledy, erosion, and you'd have lots of bioturbation. Well, how and why would all these different geological processes form fine horizontal layers? It says in that one there, some geologists believe that the plateau has risen as much as 10,000 feet since the uplift began. This is just stories. It's just what they think happened. It's not what they know happened. The accumulated rock created a geological layer cake with most of the material hidden below the surface. They're calling it a layer cake because of all these absolutely flat horizontal lines of sedimentary rock. So you can see there, these flat lines that were laid down by water. It wasn't laid down by ocean after ocean or rivers or deserts, sea, it's just obvious that this was laid down by water, and it was only eroded after the recession of a global flood. That's what caused all the Grand Canyon to be carved out. You can see these lines everywhere. The canyon is 277 miles long, and most of it has got all these absolutely horizontal, parallel, crisp clear lines of sedimentary rock. Charles Lyell and James Hutton, who were contemporary with Charles Darwin, they came up with the idea of the geological column. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's a figment of man's uniformitarian imagination. It's trying to put God's magnificent creation out of the equation. Darwin, the origin of the species by means of natural selection. Did you know what the other title is? Preservation of favoured races in the struggle for life. And that's why we've got so much hatred and racialism in the world. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, they were evolutionists, so they thought, oh, we'll just get rid of these people, they're inferior to us. But Charles Darwin, he took these books on board the Beagle, and Charles Lyell's ideas on geology and James Hutton's books influenced him to think in terms of millions of years, paving the way for his theory, and that's all it is, a theory of evolution. In his private correspondence, Charles Lyell admitted to the strongly anti-biblical, anti-mosaical nature of his ideas. In 1829, just a few months prior to the publication of the first volume of his Principles of Geology, Lyell wrote, in a letter to fellow old earth geologist Roderick Murchison, I trust I shall make my sketch of the progress of geology popular. Old Reverend John Fleming is frightened and thinks this age will not stand my anti-mosaical conclusions, and at least that the subject will for a time become unpopular and awkward for the clergy. But I'm not afraid. I shall out with the whole, but in as conciliatory a manner as possible. So this is the geo-illogical column, because it's not logical. Horizontal layers of strata being shown there. Well, 85% of the geological column as shown in the textbooks cannot be found anywhere on Earth in this sequence. Now, fossils are found in the sedimentary layers, mostly in the order of where they lived and their ability to escape the rising waters, not the evolutionary time scale. So we have smaller things at the bottom, like trilobites, sponges, worms, and it goes to, shellfish, and then fish, amphibians, lizards, rodents, and bigger mammals, the largest stuff at the top. But interestingly, even right at the top and all the way down, there are shells and fish in with all the fossils of the mammals and rodents and lizards, because it was a global flood that deposited all these fossils. Fossils have to be rapidly buried to be preserved. So did the geological column form over millions of years? Well, here's some evolutionary writers, and they say the geological column is more of a concept than a reality. 80 to 85% of the Earth's land surface does not have even 3 out of the 10 geological periods appearing in correct consecutive order required by evolutionism. Even the walls of the Grand Canyon include only about 5 of these periods. 80 to 85% of the geological column as shown in the textbooks, in the schools, the universities, the colleges, on telly, BBC. It cannot be found anywhere on Earth in this sequence. So let's talk about erosion, right? Importance of erosion. There above the top left is coal and sandstone in Alaska. Now, how do you get such fine horizontal layers of coal, covered by sediment below and on top? From America to China and all across the world, virtually no erosion or bioturbation exists between the horizontal sedimentary layers. Now, that bottom picture is the Coconino sandstone and the Hermit shale, about halfway up in the Grand Canyon. And for thousands of miles, we have this very fine layer. Now, if there'd been millions of years, we would have a higgledy-piggledy layer, wouldn't we? We'd have erosion and we'd have bioturbation, but we haven't. And that goes for a long, long way in the Grand Canyon. And we see things like this, absolutely straight, waterborne layers of sedimentary rock. Yeah? Sedimentary layers for hundreds of thousands of miles. That's at the top of the Grand Canyon. And you'll see a few in the videos of how it is just so perfectly flat at the top of the canyon because it was laid down by water. Now, the importance of bioturbation. Well, what's that? Well, there's an animation of a shallow, seashore with crustaceans, going up and down, and shrimps and what have you. And you would also have, seaweed, wormholes. You'd have all that kind of thing. But between the horizontal sedimentary layers, in most of the horizontal layers around the world, we see no marine bioturbation. There is no terra soil bioturbation. There are no plant roots. There are no tree roots. There is no erosion. But there are billions of dead creatures trapped within the sedimentary layers. So I can't emphasize enough the waterborne horizontal sedimentary layers that can be seen in very many places all over the world are mostly all as flat as pancakes. Now, this is going to be a little video showing that it hasn't got the necessary erosion evident if they were millions of years old. It's Jay Seagate on the Origins channel, and you can go to him. He does some great videos explaining, why evolution is a load of rubbish and why, God's word is true.
So here's the idea of these layers in the earth. Geologists for many, many years taught that each of these layers, they were laid down slowly by natural processes over hundreds of thousands and millions of years. But then when they realized that the only way you're going to get fossils is by burying these things very rapidly. So they realized, okay, they were buried rapidly. Well, then they lose their millions of years. So they were creative, put the time in between the layers. Visually, this is why this is a problem. So let's say this layer was laid down rapidly because we have fossils in it. If it sat there for millions of years, you would see erosion in the top of that layer. Then the next layer would come along very rapidly and fill that in with fossils there in the layer. Then if that sat there for millions of years, you'd see more erosion, sometimes very significant erosion. Then that would get filled in by the next layer rapidly, making fossils. And if that sat there, you'd see more erosion on that. Point is this, if you look at the contact between these layers, it kind of goes all over the place because of what we should expect to see with erosion. This is what we should observe in the rock record if the evolutionary narrative is correct. This is what we actually see. We see pancakes. I don't have time for a story. When I was speaking over in Russia, I was giving this talk. I showed the pancakes. The next day, a Russian woman who didn't speak English walked up to me, gave me some Tupperware. I got Russian pancakes.
Oh, wow.
Kind of fun. Here's an example, painted desert in Arizona. The layers are going straight across like pancakes. No time in between these layers. More layers, no time in between.
So you can see those layers are straight. Now the secular geologists, they try to explain away the millions of years. And in between these very flat layers, they say 6 million years missing there, 14 million years missing there, 100 million years missing there, and 1 billion years missing there at the bottom of the canyon. But all the layers are absolutely flat, knife edge flat. So how do you explain that? Now, coal formation. So you saw that, the coal there, and with sandstone. So that's the jagged cliffs near the Usabelly coal mine in Alaska. Horizontal knife edge layers of coal in between knife edge layers of sandstone, siltstone and conglomerate. How did the coal get there? So the main theory of the long time evolutionists is, it all happened in swamps. How could such a great amount of vegetation collect together in one place? No one alive today has ever observed such a clean, symmetrical process. All uniformitarian geological scientists can do is make up stories, plausible explanations based on what they think might have happened. So that's magnificent, isn't it? But that coal was laid down by water in a global flood. The swamp theory just doesn't cut the mustard. We don't see swamps forming coal today. We just don't see it. But we do see lots of, on our roadways, we see coal riders and we see main coal in sedimentary rock. Like that. We see this kind of thing. There's fine coal layers in sedimentary rock. That is the Mitsubishi coal mine in New Zealand. We see, you can see all the sedimentary layers in that coal mine there. There's another one, flat sedimentary layers laid down by water. It doesn't matter where you look about anything to do with coal, you look at it and it's all been laid down by water. It's flat. There's another one. And of course we have these great amounts of coal. And of course a lot of evolutionists say, there's too much coal. We couldn't, or if all the trees were buried in the world today, we wouldn't get that much coal. Well, they don't think about this because they don't believe there was a global flood. Well, before the global flood, there was 50% more oxygen. And we know this because we can measure the oxygen in amber, the bubbles in amber. And we now know that there was 50% more oxygen then. And also, we don't know how much vegetation grew with those really good conditions in over 1,000 years. How does oil form? Well, here's a good article, Animal Wastes Become Oil, by Lemley B. Anything into Oil, Discover 27. Turkey and pig slaughterhouse wastes are daily trucked into the world's first biorefinery, a thermal conversion processing plant in Carthage, Missouri. On peak production days, 500 barrels of high quality fuel oil, better than crude oil, are made from 270 tons of turkey guts and 20 tons of pig fat. I say, how did the very large amount of dead animals and or vegetation, because it had to be lots and lots of it, needed to accumulate all in one place to form into vast oil reservoirs in the Earth's crust or below the Earth's crust without it all being rapidly and catastrophically buried? What other logical, sensible explanations are there for the observed evidence apart from a catastrophic, waterborne, rapid burial of sediment? Yeah, and that's how, we've got all this oil and gas below the surface of the earth. It happened in a great global flood. So the Grand Canyon, we see all those straight lines. So if the layers are different ages, why are there no erosion marks between the layers? If the layers are different ages, why are there no layers of soil between the layers? Well, what do we find? Well, this is what we find. We find water ripple marks, raindrop marks, bird animal tracks. They can be found in between layers from gaps in the tidal sedimentary surges in the early stages of the flood. So you can see there on the left, those ripple marks. It's been uncovered by upper, sedimentary rock, and you can see the ripples. So this all happened in a great global flood. We get unconformities like that, but it was still laid down by water. The Grand Canyon is about 1 mile deep, 18 miles wide, and 277 miles long. So could the little Colorado River erode away sedimentary rock 1 mile deep, 18 miles wide, and 277 miles long? No chance. The Colorado River enters the canyon at 2,800 foot and it exits at 1,800 foot. The top of the canyon is 6,900 foot to 8,500 foot. Is it logical that the little Colorado River could have carved out the Grand Canyon? Because water only goes downhill. There are above the Grand Canyon the geological remains of great depressions where lakes formed as the global floodwaters receded. It was these waters that forced through a natural land dam that carved out the Grand Canyon. And we've still got the shorelines there of the Hopi Lake and the Grand Lake. And this is all well documented. So there's the Grand Canyon. You can see those fine layers, no erosion. So what amount of water was needed to, move all those soft sediments? It could only have happened in a great global flood. So this is the Kaibab Plateau above the Grand Canyon. And we're now coming to the shorelines of Hopi Lake and the Grand Lake. So there we've got Hopi Lake. And what happened in the recession of the flood, more likely the most logical, plausible explanation is that it cut through the soft sedimentary rock that hadn't been there long. And it formed lakes and even more lakes. And we can still see the topography of this today from an aerial position. And then it more likely cut through, trying to escape, and cut out the Grand Canyon with vast amounts of water, formed more lakes at the bottom, and they've still got the shorelines of them down there. We can still see that. And then of course the water receded, and eventually it all dried up, and you were just left with the Grand Canyon with a little river, and the little river didn't come from the very top. So that's how it was formed, the most logical way it could have been formed. So there's the Grand Canyon, the Kaibag Plateau from an aerial position. Now this is empirical experiments and research which is observed and tested, proving that all these stratified layers around the world were the result of flood-borne sediments. So on the right there you can see the flood waters in this animation going up and the flood waters going off to the right and forming sedimentary layers with the water pulling the sediment along. Now on the left there you see the troughs where they were doing these experiments, and they're very detailed. There's a really good video on YouTube from the Colorado University, and you can see how all this sediment was laid down. Now on the right there you see the water going down, the end of the global flood. That's when the Grand Canyon and all the canyons around the world and lots of the features we see that were formed by the recession of the flood. So there's lots of valleys, all around the world that were washed out by the recession of the flood. So there you can see the sediment going off to the right. So there's lots of evidence of this. That's beside a road there. You can see those sedimentary layers. And obviously it was going one way, the water at one time, and then it started going another way, laying down sediment. So check out on YouTube, Experiments in Stratification at the Colorado University. So let's just talk about sedimentary layers all around the world, because they're all over the world. So that's Namibia in South Africa. You can see the straight lines of sedimentary layers. There we've got Taiwan, straight lines. There we've got Australia, New South Wales, also straight lines. There we've got Romania, and we see straight lines again. There's been quite a bit of erosion there, but that was probably at the recession of the flood or in the last 4,500 years. There we've got Hawaii, straight lines again of horizontal sedimentary waterborne rock. There we've got Kazakhstan, and again, so wherever we go around the world we can see these straight lines. That's the Grand Canyon, USA side canyon. Now there's no way a river carved that out after the sedimentary rock was put down. It was all eroded away because the sediment was silt soft and there was vast amounts of water receding at the end of the global flood. So we know this was a worldwide global flood. So if you see the map at the top there, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's just a few places in the world that we have the Grand Canyon, Arizona with Tapete sandstone. Then we've got the Chippewa Falls in Wisconsin, that's number 2. And then we've got Libya, North Africa. And then we've got Timnah, Israel. And you've all got this Cambrian Tapete sandstone, all with fine horizontal sedimentary layers. And if we went over to China or up to Russia, you'd find the same thing, because it was worldwide flood. Look at that beautiful picture of the Silk Road in Kazakhstan, of the waterborne sedimentary layers, and the erosion happened at the end of the flood. Canyons around the world, so there's Namibia, Africa, South Africa, Tibet, China, New South Wales, Australia, Taiwan, Peru, Romania, Mexico. So wherever we look, we see all these sedimentary layers, all nice and straight. And there's estimated to be about 300 or over 300 canyons around the world. So this is just another example. Right across the world from America, from the Grand Canyon, we have these kind of things. It's another canyon there. And we see all these straight lines of sedimentary rock. You can see it is just absolutely flat. And even in that stack there, you can still see the sedimentary layers. So obviously that picture on the right there, that stack was laid down sedimentary rock in a global flood, and at the recession of the flood, it was all the erosion around it was taken away, left the stack standing because it was probably slightly harder. So we see all this horizontal waterborne fine layers of sedimentary rock, no erosion, no bioturbation. There it is in Iceland. There's another one in Iceland. I could show you so many pictures of, flat layers of sedimentary rock, but can't make this video too long. So let's just recap. Strata is layers of well-defined horizontal deposits of flood-borne sediments, one on top of the other. So there's the Jurassic West coast of England, and there's the Cheddar Gorge, England. It was an effect of the tidal surges when the earth was covered by water over a mile deep. There's the Grand Taihang Canyon in China. You can see the absolute straight lines of waterborne sedimentary rock. So that's Arizona, I think it's Utah. You can see there that we've got the straight lines in all those pillars. And, all that erosion was at the end of the global flood, but we still see the sedimentary layers of rock laid down by water. Chalk beds and fossils in Kansas. So we can see chalk beds there with straight lines. The western Kansas chalk beds of North America include largely complete fossils of giant swimming and flying reptiles known as mosasaurs, plesiosaurs and tetrasaurs, as well as fossils of aquatic birds with teeth, 20-foot long fish and clams, up to 6 feet in diameter. Also found fossilized in the Kansas chalk beds is the voracious predatory fish Ixphactinus audax, 13-foot long, with a nearly perfectly preserved 6-foot long fish, the Gillicus orcotus, inside it. You can go to this, it's Dr. A. Snelling, chalk it up to a global flood. And to fossilize such large creatures, enormous amounts of sediment had to bury them instantly before the creatures had time to escape. Fish are known to decompose quickly unless they are completely buried within a few days. Yet the fish found fossilized in the chalk beds show no signs of decay. So there's the chalk beds in Kansas. You can see all those fine layers of sedimentary rock. The fish within a fish was found in the Niobrara Chalk Formation of Gove County, Kansas, USA. And it was discovered in 1952 by the renowned paleontologist George F. Sternberg. And the specimen is now on display at the Sternberg Museum of Natural History in Kansas. And you can go to that, geokansas.ku.edu chalk. And there's also lots of flying creatures. That could be a pterodactyl of some kind, but they were laid down rapidly in the chalk sediment by the global flood. Not so common are the larger animal fossils found in chalk. In Europe, mosasaur skulls were found in a chalk quarry in Maastricht, Netherlands. And you can see an engraving done by G.R. Levellier and published in a book. And you can go to that on Google Books if you so wish. But in the Maastricht Museum, there is the actual bones of the fossils that were found in the chalk. So in Britain, in England, we have chalk beds. There's Dover down there, and the green there is the chalk. But we have British chalk fossils, and you can go to this website. Rare but spectacular fossils of exceptionally preserved fish, starfish, echinoids, crinoids and crustaceans record these events. Other scarce fossils include tetrasaurs, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs and turtles, and very rarely the fossil remains of dinosaurs. The White Cliffs of Dover are all laid down in well-defined, horizontal fine waterborne sedimentary layers. Now, I had a lot of critique about this, and that's why I'm redoing this video. But you can see the lines there on that right picture, and the black lines are flint. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this was all laid down in a flood. Now, if you look to the bottom there, you can see all these little coloured lines. Well, the chalk beds cover thousands of miles from England through France, all the way down through Turkey and Israel. And it says there, the Conesian stage, 87 millions of years ago. Well, it can't be, can it? Because all those sedimentary layers, these coloured lines, it was laid down within a year. There's erosion on the top, which probably happened at the trail end of the flood, the recession of the flood, or in the last 4,500 years. But we have fossils. And fossils can only happen if they're laid down quickly, not in millions of years of oceans. We have crustaceans, shark teeth, fish. How are they still here? Have you thought about that one? Folkestone dinosaur footprints. Located approximately 7 to 8 miles west of Dover in the Folkestone Formation, while the White Cliffs themselves are made of chalk and primarily contain marine fossils like ammonites and echinoids, the nearby foreshore and cliffs of Folkestone have yielded significant dinosaur tracks and bones. Now, I don't think that's chalk, I think it's probably limestone, but it's only 7 to 8 miles west of Dover. And initially I thought they were, it was chalk, but maybe not. But it's on the British Chalk Fossils and Discovering Fossil websites. But the important thing is, as I said about these fossils and footprints, if these footprints are 65 plus million years old, because that's when the dinosaurs in the evolutionary mindset, they went extinct, why haven't they eroded away? Let's have a think about that. So this is the AI mode. I put into AI. At the observed current rate of erosion, how long would it take for Mount Everest to erode down to sea level? So that's the tallest mountain in the world, which so happens to have shell marine fossils on the top of it. And, it says the answer was, if we look at Mount Everest purely as a block of rock being worn away by natural forces, it would take roughly 44.2 million years to reach sea level. Well, using my PhD in common sense, that's a joke, positive huge dose of common sense, if Mount Everest would erode away in 44.2 million years, or even 60 million years, at the current rate of erosion, why would any dinosaur fossils or their footprints still be around today? Doesn't make sense. Now, Elon Musk, he says that AI is as intelligent as all the PhD scientists in the world because they can access all the information. Well, let's not even think about the 16 kinds so far of biological soft tissues in over 120 peer-reviewed papers by evolutionary secular scientists, and they actually report on chromosomes and DNA, and I'll show you that now. Anyone can check out these figures by AI, Grok, Gemini, Copilot.
Did you know that Dr. Schweitzer's mainstream discovery that hit the news in 2005 is just the tip of the iceberg? Hundreds of secular scientists from around the world have published over 120 science articles describing original biomaterials from dinosaurs and other ancient creatures throughout the geologic column since 1954. And it's not just one type of soft tissue or biochemical they're finding, but 16 different varieties, including blood vessels, red blood cells, hemoglobin, osteocytes, ovalbumin, chitin, unmineralized bone, collagen, chromosomes, skin pigments, VEX proteins, histone, keratin, and elastin. The most recent two discoveries are cartilage and even nerve cells from Triceratops. What's so amazing about these findings is that the entire paleontology field, with thousands of scientists, completely missed these original short-lived biomaterials. Why? Because they simply believed they were just hardened rocks based on their millions of years worldview.
Derek Briggs is curator of invertebrate paleontology at the Peabody Museum at Yale University. So along comes Mary Schweitzer, and she's starting to look inside dinosaur bones and has made this startling discovery about the presence of red blood cells. What was your initial reaction to that?
Oh, I think the same reaction as everybody's, that this was totally improbable. She'd perhaps misinterpreted the evidence or was exaggerating the potential for what she was seeing.
So skeptical at first?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Why do you think it didn't occur to anybody?
Because we have this clear understanding that part of all biological cycles involves decay. I mean, nature is set up to break down that material and recycle it. So it's just improbable that those kinds of very delicate structures would survive, particularly for millions of years.
When you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. This is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone. We put it in the solution. We waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
Any dinosaur fossil tested for carbon-14 also reveals that they're only thousands of years old. Carbon-14 testing only goes up to about 50 to 90,000 years at the most. Darwin's secular scientists now refuse to test fossils in their mass spectrometer labs because they're controlled by the Darwinian academia, without knowing first what the fossil is and exactly where it is from. I wonder why. Check out my radiometric dating deception video. It'll tell you all about that, just how corrupt the whole evolutionary system is, because they don't really want a God. Any coal tested for carbon-14 is also only thousands of years old. And I've done a video about fossils, which tells you an awful lot, that all these fossils are not millions of years old. But don't tell anyone. It's a secret. We've got to know, we mustn't really look at the evidence properly. This is the nautiloid mass burial at the Grand Canyon. The red wall limestone is a layer of the Grand Canyon several hundred feet thick and spread over thousands of square miles. Uniformitarian geology, that's evolutionary geology, says that the red wall limestone was deposited slowly over hundreds of millions of years. Well, in 2002, geologist Dr. Steve Austin, and he's a really good geologist, stunned the Geological Society of America with the discovery of billions of nautiloid fossils preserved in a 2-meter thick layer of the red wall limestone. Nautiloids have soft bodies inside the shell. The bodies decay quickly. The shells all point in the same direction, or mostly do. This indicates that they were deposited by a massive sediment flow over a few days, not millions of years. For me, the nautiloid mass burial is absolute concrete proof of the global flood, as they are all facing the same way. Well, at least 95% are. Some of them are standing up, some of them on a slight angle, but uniformitarian views do not cut the mustard. Now have a look, have a think about AI mode again. Right, it's very clever. Elon Musk says it's very clever. So I put in, at the current rate of observed erosion, how long before the nautiloid fossils in the Grand Canyon red wall limestone to erode away? And their answer was, and there's a lot to this, I've only taken a screenshot of the very top. Calculations based on the observed geological data suggest it would take approximately 2.4 million to 4 million years for the red wall limestone and its famous nautiloid fossil bed to completely erode away. Well, why is the red wall limestone still there? People don't think about this. They don't look, deeply enough. They just accept the stories that the evolutionists tell. And, if we look at dinosaur fossils, there wouldn't be any dinosaur fossils either, and the ones that are intact are in a death throw, a drowning position, but all the others are all chewed up, because it was a global flood and all the bones are all mixed up in the mud and the sediment. This is about Mount St. Helens.
On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens, located 95 miles south of Seattle, Washington, erupted. The eruption was triggered by an earthquake centered beneath the mountain that measured 5.1 on the Richter scale. The lateral blast swept out the north side of Mount St. Helens at 300 miles per hour. With temperatures as high as 660 degrees Fahrenheit and the power of 24 megatons of thermal energy, it snapped 100-year-old trees like toothpicks and stripped them of their bark. Before the famous eruption at Mount St. Helens, scientists were mostly familiar with slow-acting examples of geologic change. But at Mount St. Helens, geologists watched the Earth's surface change quite rapidly. Icebergs were buried in hot avalanche material. They melted and formed badlands in days. Eruptions on May 18 and June 10 produced fine layers in hours. On June 10, mud flows cut zigzag canyons 100 feet deep in soft sand and mud, complete with perpendicular side canyons. Canyons that are reminiscent of the geography of Grand Canyon, only 40 times smaller and clearly produced within hours. Mud flows over the following decade cut hundreds of feet into solid rock in just days of cutting time. Fallen trees formed a log mat on the surface of Spirit Lake and dropped bark to the bottom of the lake, accumulating up to 3 feet of bark peat in just a couple years. And vertically floating logs sinking to the bottom of the lake resulted in buried trees in only a decade, similar to the trees of Yellowstone's fossil forest, which are also buried in volcanic layers. Even though Mount St. Helens is a very small catastrophe compared to the flood or the major catastrophes immediately following the flood, it provides a better clue to what happened in those times than the slow geologic processes which are most commonly seen in the present.
So fine horizontal sedimentary layers formed in hours, not millions of years. And that's how all the sedimentary layers in the Grand Canyon were formed. Polystate trees, logical evidence of rapid sediment deposits. We see these all over the place. Scientists estimate there are 20,000 trees in the bottom of Spirit Lake, Many of them are buried upright and some are already 15 feet deep in sediments. Polystrate trees are found in great numbers and they're found all over the world on every continent. How's this explained? Because they were buried rapidly in sediment in a great global flood. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon, 20-foot boulders are encased in strata. This can only happen in massive flood conditions. You can see the sediment strata there has gone below and above the boulder. So this wasn't formed in oceans, this was formed in waterborne sediment. There's another boulder, the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Now folded sedimentary rock, we see this, we see it all over the world, not as much as the horizontal layers, but we do see it. But note that the folded strata is still very well defined. This had to be soft sediment laid down by the flood, then squeezed by the uplift of tectonic plates. Bent sedimentary rock. Do we see bent rock strata forming today? Nope, no we don't. Now the next slide is recent research by Dr. Andrew Snelling, which proves that these bent sedimentary rocks were soft when they were bent, and they were bent by water and tectonic plate squeezing. So groundbreaking geological research in microscopy of the folded sedimentary Grand Canyon rocks. So this was in the main Australian newspaper on the front page. So what's this all about then? Well, an Australian geologist who believes the Bible is the literal word of God, as I do, has claimed a historical legal victory in the United States following the settlement of his lawsuit against the administrators of the Grand Canyon, who had refused to allow him to conduct research aimed at proving the story of the global flood. So he told the Australian he'd been trying since 2013 to get a permit to collect rock samples for a peer-reviewed scientific research project within the Grand Canyon that would challenge the idea that the rock layers are millions of years old. Yeah, so a lawsuit against the administrators of the Grand Canyon who had refused to allow him to take the samples. Well, this is where he took the samples, in the Tapete sandstone, and there's a carbon canyon fold, and he took about 53 samples altogether. And him and his team, they took them back to the lab and they examined them in great depth. So creation scientists' groundbreaking research at Grand Canyon published 4-year study helps confirm rapid formation of the canyon's layers by massive flooding. The bedrock belief of evolutionary geologists has been convincingly undermined today with the publication of groundbreaking Grand Canyon research conducted by geologist Dr. Andrew Snelling of Answers in Genesis. So there he is, Andrew Snelling, and Dr. Snelling spent thousands of hours inspecting rock samples from the Grand Canyon through the microscope and recorded the details he observed. And there's lots of information. You can go to this paper quite easily. Microscopic images described by Dr. Snelling, these demonstrate that the folded rock layers were not subjected to heat and pressure and fit the biblical model of the flood. So yeah, you can download this paper, or you can go to YouTube and listen to Dr. Andrew Snelling and his team talking about the research they did. There's the paper there. I just want to read this little bit at the bottom. It says there are no signs, either macroscopic or microscopic, that the sandstone or its constituent grains have been even slightly metamorphosized. Instead, the mineralogical content textual features, sedimentary structures, continental scale deposition, paleocurrent directions matching continental patterns, and even the tracks and traces of transitioning invertebrates all indicate rapid burial. Furthermore, all are consistent with the catastrophic erosion of the great unconformity near the initiation, that's the beginning of the global Genesis flood cataclysm, only about 4,350 years ago. Well, I say 4,500 years ago, but it doesn't matter. So, the evidence is there, it can be found, but people don't want to, loads of people ignore this, but there's been no refutations by any secular geologists. And, I've had one geologist say, oh, yeah, but it's not in secular science peer-reviewed articles. Well, it's in the Answers to Genesis, research journals, and there's just as good as scientists, working who are creationists who've got absolutely wonderful evidence. But shh, don't tell anybody. It's not generally known, all this. We mustn't spread this around. So in the Bible, which I believe in from the beginning to the end, Jesus said in Matthew 24, as in the days of Noah. And he was referring back to 3 chapters at the largest account of any one thing in the Bible, the Genesis flood, the flood in the time of Noah. But Jesus was talking about as in the days of Noah. And what he was referring to is the fact that when he returns, it will be like in the days of Noah. People will not be expecting it, but it's going to come. In 2 Peter chapter 3, knowing this first, there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So it's a warning. This is a warning that, in the last days there's scoffers. I know lots of scoffers. Lots of them. Oh, God's not true. The Bible's a load of rubbish. Evolution. There's so much science about evolution. But you know what? Most people don't even look at the science of evolution deeply enough. So this video is about all the irrefutable evidence that we can see in many places all over the world in the well-defined parallel, horizontal, sedimentary waterborne layers that have virtually no erosion or bioturbation in between. If we use our common sense and logic, this is the aftermath of a global flood catastrophe not so very long ago, 4,500 years ago. Please check out my video of the fossil record and the logical, empirical evidence that refutes millions of years of evolution. Oh, top of the Grand Canyon there, fine sedimentary waterborne layers. In the show notes, I put a few links. Genesis Apologetics, Flood Geology, worth looking at. Dr. J. Seagate from the Starting Point Project, Flood Sedimentary Evidence. There's lots and lots of good stuff that you can actually see the truth about the world's, topography today. And J. Seagate does a good video on, well, he does quite a few videos on the complexity of the four-dimensional coding of DNA. Impossible for evolution. Coding in DNA, the complexity, it can only have come from a mind. It didn't happen by chance. And the observed evidence reveals no erosion or bioturbation in these canyons. Yeah. So start looking at the truth. Evolution is dead in the water, but they just don't know about it. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.